Characters. Let's talk about them. So as authors, we always hear the need from our readers for character-driven stories, but what exactly does that mean? The obvious definition would be that you have a plot that is driven by the characters, that is pushed forward by the characters. However, sometimes when you're writing, you already have a plot. So how do you get your characters to go where they're supposed to go to move the plot along? How do you get them to move as you're trying to make them move? The story shouldn't just happen to your characters. The story should be completely influenced by your characters. The story should happen because of your characters. So how do you get an already written plot and make it character driven? Maybe you already have strong vibes for what your character is. If you know what they're like and what they kind of are supposed to embody, then how do you tell a story that shows off their strengths, that shows them off in a way that doesn't feel contrived? Heck, what should you name your characters? What tools can you use to get a better understanding for your character? And can you overdevelop a character? That is what we'll be discussing here in this episode of On Writing. So, welcome back. I'm Meg Wrights. I write under the name AMH Johnson. I apologize that the camera and lighting isn't great. I tried to do this during the day, but my day got away from me and I can't really do it tomorrow. And so I set up my lighting, and that meant I had to put my regular camera away and use my webcam on my laptop because that one doesn't shake when I gesture. So apologies, but as a mom of 3 and one of them is a very young baby, I'm taking my time where I can take my time. And that's probably one of the biggest things you can do just as an adult. You take your time when you can take your time. And this is me taking my time. Anyway, back to characters. So let's start this character process with what makes a character. Minor to all the way to main characters, your characters should each have strengths, fears, goals, and dynamics. Every single one of them has to have this, and having these 4 will at least influence you or influence your story to the point that it makes this is how you get a character-driven plot. If you have the character but don't have a plot yet, or if you have a plot, now this is how you develop your character. So you might notice I didn't say weaknesses, and there's a very good reason for that. Mainly it's because weaknesses are actually strengths, but in the wrong situation. Take this scene from Jurassic Park. Now, when Alex pulls out the flashlight, you might think she's doing the standard necessary stupidity thing that's required in these horror thriller stories where she's got to signal the monster so the monster hunts them down, right? That's actually not what she's doing. If you remember the story well enough, or if you haven't seen it, sorry, spoilers, but her biggest strength is that she's a hacker. She's into technology and computers, and that's her biggest strength. It becomes a very big point towards the end of the movie that she's able to bring the system back because she is very well versed in technology. Now think about it in this scene. This scene was used to set that strength up because think about what she does. She grabs the flashlight and starts signaling SOS, which is what she, as someone who is technologically trained, would do in an emergency situation. You signal to others SOS, and that sets up that is her big strength. Again, a character's weakness is their strength in the wrong setting. Another very famous version of this is the Hamlet Othello. So there's a saying that if Hamlet and Othello had swapped stories, their stories would no longer be tragedies but comedies. And this is because Hamlet his biggest strength was being very smart, but he tended to overthink. And if Hamlet were dropped into Othello's story as Othello, if Hamlet was Othello, he would have outthought Iago, and Iago's plans would have crumbled, and everyone would have lived happily ever after. Same thing with Othello. See, Hamlet overthought when the king was praying, and that's what ended up letting him delay, and that delay ended up causing all of the deaths toward the end of Hamlet. Whereas Othello would have had no qualms killing the king as soon as he found him, even if he was praying or not. King's dead, in Othello's point of view. That's the thing. So Othello's strengths would have helped him in Hamlet, but not in his own story, whereas Hamlet's strengths would have helped him in Othello, but not his own story. And that's how you get tragedies. So if you know what your character is good at, put them in situations where their usual solution won't work. And put them in situations where it does. You want to put them in both. Again, in Jurassic Park, you see Alex in a situation where her technology background doesn't work. And you see it again later in a situation where it does work, and she is an active and very necessary part of the team. Doing both of these will be good plot points, and they'll essentially occur as guides to push your plot forward. They need to be pivotal moments in your plot, and that's the first step in making a character-driven plot. So the next one, so we've talked about strengths and at the same time weaknesses, because they're the same thing. Now let's talk fears. Fear is both things that they can be literally afraid of, like spiders in closed spaces, as well as things that they just don't want to happen. If you're writing a horror, they're literally afraid things like spiders in closed spaces and clowns and whatever. That can help you give the trials you need to put your character through for the horror beats. Hi, Hachi. That can give you the beats you need, the trials you need to put your characters through in a horror setting. Otherwise, they're just kind of good to know. You can use them as a general weakness to kind of broaden your character to the reader. Now, going towards the fears of things that they just don't want to happen, those give your character their drive. Ask yourself, what do they not want to happen? In any given scene, ask them, what do they not want to happen? And what would they do to make sure it doesn't happen? And make them do it. I'm going to use my book a lot as an example in this video. This book particularly, Midnight Over Moors, this was my first book. So, first example I'll use here to discuss fears. One of the main fears of my main character, Jenna, is that she is afraid of talking to ghosts. She's from Savannah, which is a very haunted town, and she's very much aware of the spooks. So she's afraid to talk to ghosts. However, she's going to be forced to talk to ghosts. That is the biggest example I can give you. What does she not want to happen? Either make that happen or show what they would do to ensure that it doesn't happen. And then goals are very similar to fears. Kind of like strengths and weaknesses, although goals can be kind of separate, so they're slightly different, but they're approached similarly. They are both, what does the character just want in life generally, and what will they do to get it, as well as what is something that they are being forced to do to combat their fears. All right. So when you enter a scenario, when you have your character enter a scenario that their fear is involved in, what are they doing to get out? That is their goal at the moment, to get away from that fear. But you also want a general overarching goal. So again, when she's talking to ghosts, what is she doing to get out of the situation of talking to ghosts? That's in here. As well as she has an overarching goal of wanting to get good grades in school so she can go to a good school, go to a good college, because this is YA, so high school. So she has an overarching goal, and that's good to have for your character. You want them to have an overarching goal, but you also want them in their scenes to have a goal. What do they want in this scene? And if that scene is something triggering to their fears, that tells you what they want and how are they going to get it. So we've done strengths/weaknesses, we've done fears, and we've done goals. So the last thing is dynamics. And what do I mean by dynamics? Dynamics are how your character relates to other characters in your story. What do their relationships with each other look like? Let's take a very rich character, a very well-known character like Tyrion Lannister. His family dynamic is completely worked out in the books, and it also influences how he looks, which we'll get into later. But the first thing you kind of ask when you're wondering about this character is that he's from, what we know about him already is that he's from a family we're supposed to hate, but we don't hate him, which is weird. Why don't we hate him? And then the answer to that is, well, his family hates him. Okay, why does his family hate him? Well, his father hates him because he's an imp, and in this world, imps are pretty much bastards. I probably shouldn't say that. In this world, imps are illegitimate, essentially. Well, not really illegitimate, but they're kind of seen as like, you're not mine. His siblings hate him because his birth was difficult and their mother died during childbirth. What's another dynamic that the Lannisters have with everybody else around them? Well, they're known to be beyond wealthy compared to most of the other noble houses. They are very smart and very shrewd, and they can be very calculating, and that sometimes rubs people the wrong way, but it has allowed them to gain a good foothold in the castle. So Tyrion, we also know, is that he is the most smart and shrewd among his siblings, among his family. So that's another dynamic that you need to take into consideration when you're thinking of him as a character. So we know that Tyrion is a smart, shrewd imp from the wealthiest family in the world. Because he's an imp, he relates to the other illegitimate children of the nobility. Because he's wealthy, he believes he can get away in any situation with the right price. So that is his dynamic. When he approaches a situation, you know that is how he's going to approach a situation. He's either going to be relatable to someone of a demeaned or lower birth, or he's going to use his money. That's all you need to know. You need to ask, how are they going to approach relationships? Another example, again, pulling this book. Another example from my book is that my main character Jenna, she's from the South. She's from Savannah. So I put her in, she's going to Maine, which is the North. So what is the dynamic? There is a huge dynamic cultural shift between people from the South and people from the North. She's doesn't run into anybody really from the South up in Maine. So what is that? What are those dynamics? How do those dynamics, cultural dynamics, impact her relationships with the other people at the new school she's going to? And that is those kind of dynamics you're going to want to look for. And they are also going to provide small little beats in your plot. So the strengths can give you major plot moments, as well as the fears and goals. And dynamics gives you a lot of the small plot moments that you need. If you ask those questions, and especially how when it comes to fears and goals, you need to ask the fears and goals thing in every scene you write. What do they want, or what do they not want, and what are they going to do to either get it or not get it? That will give you the plot you need to make your story feel rich and character driven, to make your character feel like they fit the story. So if you already have a plot, but the character is a mystery, ask yourself those questions and see who fits, how that character fits, and then you have your answer. Now let's get to, how do I describe my characters? Now, I'm not going to go over like the general, there is this push now of, if you're a romance writer, we're trying to stop using food to describe women. I don't have an entire problem with it. If you want to describe a woman's skin as milk, it is what it is. But there is a huge push for the preference to not do it. That's not what I'm going to discuss. Essentially, my whole thing about when it's coming to describe characters, you want to take the strengths, the fears, the goals, mainly the strengths, weaknesses, and dynamics, and use those to influence what your character looks like and how they would approach things. Well, not just how they would approach things, how they would present themselves to approach things is what I mean. You use those character traits to influence what they look like. Again, going back to Tyrion, we know because he's supposed to be relatable to those of underbirth, yet he's still a legitimate Lannister. What's one way that an author is going to do that? Oh, we'll make him either impaired or make him an imp, which is what George R. R. Martin did. So you want to use those social dynamics to describe why your character looks a certain way, or talks a certain way, or dresses a certain way. Maybe they have a scar on their face because one of their relationships is that they were abused, or that they had suffered, you want to use like small little things in the strengths, weaknesses, and the dynamics to influence or to show your character's backstory in everything that they present themselves as. Even if they're trying to hide stuff from the world, they want to keep stuff sheltered, you can still use that in your character descriptions. So all of this gives your characters the development they need for a good story and to help them fully realize. Now, I asked at the beginning of the video, can you overdevelop a character? And in my experience, absolutely you can. And generally, again, in my experience, I've written about 7-8 novels. I've published 2. I'm working on publishing a 3rd. In my experience, when you have an overdeveloped character, it's usually in the character's backstory. It's usually you've given them a strength that is no longer compatible with where your story is going. In my most recent example of writing a sequel to this book, it caused me to have writer's block for a very long time of having a backstory that was going to overpower the main story. And you can't write a backstory that's going to overpower the main story and take over what the whole meaning of the book is supposed to be. So I ended up having to remove that. It is a big problem. It's something that everybody has. It's why it's literally the meaning of kill your darlings. So maybe you've heard of that phrase, kill your darlings. It's essentially you've had this idea for so long and now it's failing and stopping you from finishing your book. So it needs to be cut out. You need to kill that part of the book, which can be really frustrating, especially if it was something that made you really, really want to write the book in the first place. Sometimes you got to cut it if it doesn't work or if it impedes your ability to write the story to the best of your ability. And to be honest, I never really liked the phrase kill your darlings because sometimes it also means like kill your characters. And you don't always have to kill your characters to have a good meaning story. But I like to look at it. It's not the first time I've referenced a book being similar to a body. And in this, it's more your book has appendicitis of a bad backstory or a bad trait that you liked and it's no longer working and it needs an appendectomy. It needs to be cut out. Again, I've described books as a body before with writing a skeleton plot and struggling with connective tissue writing. We'll go into that in a future On Writing episode. I find it's very helpful in those moments to remind myself my characters are not set in stone, my story is not fully set in stone, and the only thing that's holding me back from finishing my book and cutting that out is my own stubborn attitude. And that's the thing. You have to get over yourself. Yes, it's something you really liked, but if it's not working, it's not working and you got to cut it. Generally, if you overdevelop a character, it's likely that you have given a character a trait that was originally going to have a really nice payoff, but the story has turned and that payoff is either not going to be as strong or it's not going to have the original effect, or it's going to overpower the main plot to the point that it's not going to work out anymore. When you reach those situations, you need to scale back and cut that part out of your character background. And it's generally in the background. There's another phrase out there that says writer's block is usually caused about 2 paragraphs back. And that's the thing. So if you're blocked, it's usually something done in the lead up to what you were writing. That's the same thing. This backstory is lead up to writing. And if you have a failing backstory, you're going to have problems with finishing your book, especially if it's causing problems with making a dynamic character. And so now you've got your character, you're starting to get a better idea of your story. What do you name a character? How do you name a character? How does you have idea of character? How do you know what they're called? Well, this one is kind of where it gets easy and can be kind of fun. For me, I pick a trait and search baby names. Like in my second novel, or my novella, #hipster, main character's Rebel Young. All right. Why is she called Rebel Young? Well, because she's rebellious and youthful. Rebel Young. Pretty on the nose. And her romantic interest is Mike Davis. Mainly because Mike Davis is a very vanilla name and he's supposed to be very basic, but on the surface, he appears basic. And then you realize he's actually kind of noble. And Michael is a rather noble name, but Mike is very normal. And Davis is one of the most common names or common surnames of the area. So yeah, Mike Davis and Rebel Young. Those are 2 examples from this. This is my contemporary romance. Fun book. Another way to do this is search for popular baby names in the year that you're writing. So again, since I was doing a YA book for this one, the best friend character is Sarah Gilly. I picked the name Sarah because it was one of the most popular names of the year, popular baby names of the year. I was figuring that these two, since they're in the same grade, I mapped out what year they were supposed to be in and just picked one of the most popular baby names of that year. Sarah was like number 3 or 4. And then Gilly came from the area was another popular surname of the area. If I'm writing contemporary, that's generally what I do. I research the area and pick a surname from there, and then check baby names, and either you go with a name that has a strong trait and pick a name with that meaning, or just a very common name for that time. Now, fantasy is where it gets a little weird. Again, I have been working on fantasy novels, and I do play a lot of D&D. So for most authors in fantasy, I've actually seen them use baby names. Babynames.com is the big one, but the other one, there is actually this website called Fantasy Name Generator, and I actually use that for a lot of stuff. But that's a good place to look if you need like orc names, or like a random race name for your fantasy world, or like you need elven names, or if you need like a dragon name, you can search, you can hit our Fantasy Name Generator and it'll pop up. It's also really good for if you need to come up with a name for your fantasy town or kingdom or place, but we will get into that in a future episode of On Writing when we talk about world building. The most common, even in fantasy, is going to babynames.com and just searching, or using the name dictionaries of old. I mean, again, if you think about it, most of the Lord of the Rings names, most of the elves in Lord of the Rings, their names are just old English names that have fallen out of use. Pretty much literally all of the Akatar names back here and all of the Fourth Wing names, they are all available on babynames.com, and they're under Irish, Scottish, and Old English names. Also, sometimes Greek. Don't forget Greek. There are a lot of common cultures you can look for that have names that are not really popular to use, but they would work great in a fantasy setting. If you need a quick name, that's probably a really good place. That's probably the best place to look. If you want to take it a step further, which I have seen, it's what I do, as well as I know of a few other authors also sometimes do this, where for some names, they want to make up a name, or make up one that looks like it belongs in a fantasy setting, but it might not have a full meaning, or it might be something else. What I do is that I go into the etymology of names. I did a whole short on Tiffany's. You've seen that short. That's what I'm referencing. Like, the name Tiffany comes from the word theophania in Greek, and it means God appears, essentially. I've taken that name and changed a syllable, dropped a syllable to be a completely different name. I especially drop syllables when I'm trying to take a feminine name and turn it masculine, because if you have an Ia or ot or L, just or E, if you have a feminine ending name, you can drop that last syllable and it generally tends to be a masculine name. Yeah, I tend sometimes drop a syllable if a feminine name exists but a masculine version of it doesn't. Make a masculine version of it. It's a fantasy. Why not? You are completely unhindered in making up names in fantasy. I mean, you still want them to be understandable, but like, make up a name. That's it. That's how you make a character, and that's how you make characters that will drive your plot forward and be interesting and grip your readers. And that's what we want with writing. That's what we want to do as writers, and that's what our readers want us to do. So if you ask yourself those questions, you'll do just fine. Thank you for joining tonight. I will try and post more. I noticed that I had posted one and I had forgotten to post the second one I wanted to do, so I just figured I would start back up with here. I know it's been a little while. I've had a lot going on. Again, had a baby. So yeah, it's been a little while. And again, I apologize that the camera isn't what it was, but again, you got to take your time when you can take your time, especially as a mom with an infant. So thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.